Of all the 5 or 6 seasons we have in Minnesota, I think I like spring the best. The snow melts, the grass greens up, the tulips bloom. It's just wonderful outside. I want to go work in the greenhouse. Well, to me, this is not spring. I think we're a long ways from what I would call spring. But it looks like I'm going to be working inside today. I'm not ready for that kind of weather. It is supposed to get warmer. We are supposed to have 60s this week or close to it, so I'm going to plant my bog garden this year. I'm going to get it tuned up from what I did last year, get it cleaned up, and show you what went right and what went wrong. First place, this thing is heavy. This is about 50 pounds right now. So when I set it up next time, I'm going to kind of evaluate and see if there's a way to make it a little lighter, because this is a traveling bog garden. This goes to schools, the state fair, and of course from the backyard to in the house for winter time because it's too cold outside for this thing. But let's evaluate and see what we got here. Well, first off, this has had some winter wear, so there is some dead in there, but that's what I expect in the winter time. I clean it up in the spring because I do less damage to plants in the spring. The plants just start coming up versus long growth and having a lot of traps on the fly traps. Sarracenias have full growth. If I get it when they're young, then I don't disturb things. If I do it in the spring, I have small plants to deal with. I don't have things spread out all over. I can do a transplant easy or repotting with a little cleanup and not have to worry about breaking off new traps or flowers or new growth. The new growth is tender. Let's keep it going and keep it protected. If I get it early, I don't have to worry about the new flowers that are coming up on the Sarracenias. Before I get this whole thing torn apart, let me show you what I did in the first version, which actually I think worked out pretty well. The first layer here is all perlite. I have about 2 inches of that. 2 inches, inch and a half. Then I have a layer of sphagnum moss, and that layer of sphagnum keeps the peat perlite stuff mix that I have from seeping through into the perlite. That gives me a little bit more of a lighter mixture because I'm not dealing with a full layer of the peat mix. So the perlite is a little lighter. Heavy part is still the water. But this is how I have it mixed, and it did do well as far as the separation of the peat mix versus the perlite because of that layer of sphagnum I had in there. That was just for an example of how my layers are set up. So there's the perlite on the bottom. There's the sphagnum moss right in there. And there's my layers of my peat perlite, and I have a product called Turf Coat. I'll clarify that later in this video. That is essentially my sand, my rocks that are in here to keep things loose. But you see how my root growth is on this thing. Not all this is the Sarracenia roots. Some of that is, I think I've got an iris bog in here. Or a bog iris that I'm hoping this year will bloom for me. The first thing to any good bog garden is the container. And if you live in a zone where you don't get real deep freezing temperatures like we did here. We had 27 days where we had below zero temperatures. You can do a bigger one. My case, this is going to be just my mini bog garden. In this case, it is a Little Giant is the brand that I had, and it's about 16.5 inches in the inside diameter and very close to 8 for the depth. Now this was, I believe it was a 6.5 gallon container, and when I bought it, it was around $16, and they're around $40 at this time. Prices have changed. I have 4 holes drilled in this thing, and that is to be my water overflow. The first year I had it, I did not have the holes, and when it would rain, I would lose my peat over the top, and I decided with the 4 holes, it can leak out the water instead of pouring out the peat on the top. So that's really helped me this last year. First layer that I put in is perlite. This is about 2 inches deep, and again, this will keep the light, keep it a little bit lighter, slightly lighter, because the perlite is not going to be as heavy as what the peat mix is. But again, the water is going to be a very heavy part of it. So perlite for my first layer. My next layer is simply a layer of sphagnum moss. This just separates the perlite on the bottom from the peat layer that's going to be piling up. This will simply keep the peat from sifting down into here. The roots will still be able to get through because the sphagnum moss is going to allow that, but the peat mix is going to stay up above. My mix for this is going to be, this is called Turface MVP. It is a kind of a calcified clay or a fired clay that is very hard. They use it on baseball diamonds. It doesn't break down. It has basically the same properties as sand does, but it's a larger grain. Plus I've got the perlite and I have my peat. And this is the mix I'm using in my bog, but it's taking a lot of this. So pardon me while I continue mixing. My problem has been that the peat has been frozen, so it takes longer than I expected. So I'm going to keep mixing while you enjoy your coffee or whatever. Well, now that I've finally mixed up enough peat, sand, perlite, and turface, I always want to call it turf coat, turface, to fill my pot, and you can see I'm pretty much filled. I'm done now. I'm ready to start planting, right? Nope. I'm going to add a watering system onto this thing. This is a cool little feature that I've had. My last one, it worked out really well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dig a hole in the middle, and I'm going to put this little container in there. And in that container, I'm going to put a little pot. And that pot will be the leveling point for when I put in my bottle. This bottle will be full of water, and it will fill the bog to about that level. So when the water seeps out of here, it's going to keep the bog at a consistent level. And I'm going to know where that is all the time by pull this out. I'm going to see the depth of my water in there. So if it rains, I know what my depth is. If it gets higher, that's not a big problem. I just don't want it getting lower than that. So that's my set point. So let me get that started. All right, so I've got my hole dug and it fits the plastic container. I should mention that I do have a couple of holes in the plastic container, and these are to allow the water to drain out of here or into there. So there's my my container down at the bottom, or very near. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some of that surf face just to give me a bottom point on there for the flower pot. This is an old flower pot. It's got some height to it, which I like, and it fits in there. So now I've got my container in here. I have the pot, which is my depth point. Now when I fill this up with water, it will go in there. And what's going to happen is when I pull it out, I'm going to pull out the plastic too, so I got to watch that. Maybe what I'll do is I'll slice that. That's a good idea. But I can push my media back in amongst, tight up against, and right around it. And this gives me my point where my plantings will go all around that. And which side is front doesn't matter. I kind of like the handles to be to the side, so this will probably be my front. All right, now if I pull this, that is going to slide out. So I'm going to just make some slits in here so to make it easier for that to slide out. I'll be right back. I took a razor blade and I did slice down the sides of that container for a little bit, and you can see that my water container, my water bottle, will slide in and out real easily. So that is going to put my depth, let's see, about 3 inches below the surface. So I'm not going to have waterlogged on my Venus flytraps, which I think are more susceptible to root rot than my SARs are. But it's going to, on hot days or when I go on vacation, I can top it up. Always get that clock at that point. I'll be able to top up the water and make sure that the bog stays boggy instead of dry. So that has worked out really well for me in past years, but it's sat up a little higher. This being down a little bit more, I think it's going to be a little better for the plants. So now the next thing is to start organizing and figuring out what I'm going to plant. Well, it's been a long day, but I think it's been a successful day. The bog has been repotted, cleaned up. And part of the reason I do this every spring is, as I mentioned, the plants are smaller, so they're easier to handle. Plus, this being a sealed container, there's no chance for the water to wash away any of the dissolved solids in here or any of the impurities. They are all contained within this. So doing this in the spring gives me fresh peat, fresh sphagnum where I'm using that, and really makes it an improved bog mixture. Plus I get to go through the other plants and get things cleaned up. As you can see, I've got my Venus flytraps now planted in there. And I did stay with the Venus flytraps I had. There was a good grouping. I thought maybe there wasn't quite as many as there are, but I did put them back in there. I cut my purpurea down, but I think I've got 2 divisions here that will grow quite well. I've got 3 different types of, or 4 different types of Sarracenias in here. So they have got more space now and should do well. The bog looks a little thinner now than it did when I started, but I think this is going to work out really well. If you don't like the look of the peat or the perlite on the top, you can always top it up with some sand. That'll cover that and help reduce the splashing of the mix right now, the current state. So there it is, and in most cases this will be off, so it'll look like that. And the only time I'll really have the water container in there is when I'm not getting water from natural sources. Now I have a lot of cleaning up to do because I've got pots, plants that need to be potted, and a mess all over everything. So if you'll pardon me now, I'm going to move on to cleaning. I hope you can build a mini bog.